This video is to show you how to apply OpenQDA in a coding project. So assuming that we have created an account at openqda.org and started a project, we can then select the project from this list and add a team and a set of collaborators. Like this. And now that the team has been created, we can add email addresses of team members to invite them to collaborate with us. The project automatically creates a codebook for your projects that you can later use and export. So this includes all the categories that we have already used. I have pre-created a few categories to make it a bit easier to show you, but I'll also show how to create categories based on different coding frameworks. And the project, which is very nice, also tracks all your activity in the project. So any change that has been made to the coding or the code system is tracked like this. So you can always go back and see what has been changed in certain time spans. Okay. So before you can start coding, you have to create or import the texts. This can be from text files or other kinds of documents like Word documents, but you need to have text data. This is the important part. So you create .txt files if you create projects directly, and here you can select files from your hard drive to load up, but only text files are recognized. So for instance, I can also upload an HTML file, but this is hardly usable. So let's assume we already do have a text file, which is the one I used in the crash course lecture about the murder of a labor union leader in Colombia. So when we start coding, we have a few different options. Other than you would do in a regular analysis, I started with 3 different coding frameworks, each of which has their own section of the codebook. I'd like to showcase how you would progress through a framing analysis, how you would progress through a thematic analysis, and a narrative analysis of this very same article. In framing analysis, we start with a given set of categories that we apply to the text. So first we want to find out how the problem is being defined in the article. Ideally thinking that news articles mostly deal with problems that should be highlighted or understood. The next would be the causal analysis, which can also be a timeline, events leading up to the problem, and so on, all part of finding out where does it come from. The moral evaluation, who is the good guys, who's the bad guys, what's good, what's bad, who is evil, and so on, who is to blame and why. The treatment recommendation, so how the problem defined in the article should be treated. And finally, the question whether the core concept for our analysis, solidarity, is mentioned and where. And what we do is we go through the article step by step and see if any sections have anything to do with these different components. So somebody has been killed, which we would say is, according to most understandings, a problem. So let's say this is part of the problem definition for our framing analysis. So we go to menu and code this under problem definition, and now I see this is gray in conjunction with the gray background here. Already the first day we came to Antigua, a union leader was killed. Let's say this reiterates the problem one more time. Jaime Gallego was one of the few who stood up against the multinational mining companies in Segovia. This has two components. This altogether is part of the causal analysis, we could say. So this explains why Jaime was killed. But it also presents Jaime as one of the good guys, because standing up against the multinational mining corporations is, according to most understandings, something good that we want more of. So positive moral evaluation on top. Okay. So you see now this has two overlapping codes and therefore has no additional color here. Selskaper som stiller jord og utnytter arbeidere i regionen. This is also clearly part of a moral evaluation. It portrays the corporations above here as evil. Colombia has a long-standing tradition for pursuit of social movements, including labor unions. This again has a dual function. It says what the problem is. It extends the problem to a larger pattern of persecution. But it also explains why Jaime was killed, because of the long tradition. So we would mark this under causal analysis. After many years with murder attempt, not attempts, but saying they will kill him from paramilitary groups, he finally was killed. So this helps understand again the causation of how he came to die, establishes the timeline, because he was engaged with or did pursue the minor's rights. This again is part of the causal analysis. It's the reason why he was killed, but it also shows that he is to be evaluated positively in terms of morality. So here with the right click, we can see both codes that are applied here and the same here. To organize workers in protest and give them hope for a future with better conditions. Okay. This is also part of moral evaluation, portraying him and his purpose as something important. You could say better conditions would be part of the solutions, maybe. But you could also say this is just a vague hope and not a real solution or attempt at that. So then we have some left out text. Today we celebrate the 1st of May. And here we mention first time the term solidarity, which our analysis is actually targeting. We need to share histories of persecution of activists and social leaders. And this is part of a treatment recommendation. This is helping to make things better, all the kinds of problems that have been addressed and created, constructed before. We have to recognize the fight and the people who die for it. So again, a treatment recommendation, and this also is part of portraying the activists and social leaders in a positive light. We must contribute by exerting pressure where we can. Again, part of the treatment recommendation. Yeah, so this is the coding of this text based on a very rough code book relating to solidarity. And now that we've coded, we can see the different ways, for instance, in which moral evaluation is constructed in this text. But we can later also see that across texts and see if there is certain subgroups or so that we would like to distinguish. If that is the case, we can create a subcode here and say this is heroic tales. Okay, so there we give it a bit of a different color so we can distinguish it. So we have instances of moral evaluation where it is heroic tales that are being told. Now, if we want to revise codes, because we now have the option of classifying them in other ways, we can go through all moral evaluation codes assigned here and see if they actually are hero tails rather than what we previously had. So we right click on this code and then we get this symbol and can thereby change our code into heroic tails. This is not an instance of a heroic tail, so we keep that. Here we have no red code. This one we can reclassify again into the heroic tails. And also here, we can shift it into heroic tails. Yeah. This just mentions activists and social leaders in a general way, but this is like the marcher logic. Right. So this would be one way of treating this text, but we can come up with more. So let's take the text from a different perspective, the thematic analysis perspective. Here we would not even, let's probably create one more version of the same text. So we download the source file and create and import a new one, which is the same source document. And one more version of the same. This is just to keep the codes cleaner and not have everything overlapping. So this is V3 and this is V4. And now we make them ready to didn't really import the content. So we just paste it in here and then lock the content for coding. So we can start to code. We do the same here and lock for coding. We rename this document into framing analysis. And our next attempt is thematic analysis demo. And then we finally have narrative analysis demo. Okay, now when we code the next article, using thematic analysis, we usually would start more or less blank. So we would only have so-called in vivo codes. So for instance, we would read the top line and would say, yeah, it emphasizes that the murder happened in Colombia. So what we would do is create an in vivo code that is just called Colombia. So this already has happened here before. So we would assign this to Colombia. So if it was an in vivo code, I wouldn't have to sort it through the menu. It would just create a new code at the topmost level here. And we have a few other things that we realize might be interesting in this text. Fagforeningsleden blir drept would be another in vivo code. So if we create this as an in vivo code, it would look like this. And we would then later be able to sort it. Sorting functions by clicking on this button here, and then you can shift those around. Since we already have Fagforeningsleden blir drept as a code, we will remove this one. So this was just to okay. So we would get this. Then we would probably be not so sure as to why it emphasizes so much that it was already the first day, on the first day. But this we recognize, it's again our code that we just use. Then we see something new, like Jaime would deserve his own new in vivo code that could later be organized into a larger framework. He was one of the few who stood up against, would be also an in vivo code. I think this is obviously something that labor unions do, or at least this labor union person did, and the article more or less establishes that this is part of the task spectrum for a labor union. And we have this here. Which would be the enemies or the opposition. Now let's remove this one and create rather a in vivo code here. We can again go into sorting mode and sort this here. So that would be part of the enemies or opposition category. Okay. And the more top level categories in thematic analysis, for instance, that we have different locations, we have different protagonists, we have different tasks or scopes that are attributed to labor unions, we have different kinds in which enemies or opposition towards labor unions is presented and different dangers that are mentioned that labor unions face. This is already part of the result of the analysis, that we found these in vivo codes and then assigned them into larger packages of meaning. Okay, so this is the way the thematic analysis would work in here. Finally, we can go for our narrative analysis. Let's look at this. We have, as for a narrative analysis, we can start with a few meaningful categories that are typical of narratives, of tales. So most tales have protagonists and antagonists, something that indicates that the stakes are high, an exposition, a crisis, a resolution, maybe also a location, and so on. And here we can code the Fagforeningsleder as a protagonist, right? Being killed is certainly something that expresses high stakes and maybe also demonstrates the crisis that we are facing. And Colombia would be here not as much the location, but we would probably call it the setting. Right, so this can be a code. We put it under narrative analysis because this is what we have in here. This also establishes the setting. This is again the stakes. This is about the protagonist. This is about the antagonist. We can change the colors of these subcodes to make them stand out. No, this way. Right, so we see at first glance that it is something different. The stakes, let's make them green-ish. Okay, and so on. This is certainly also about the antagonist. This establishes both the setting and the stakes, I would say. Here we probably want to set up a new in-vivo code. Can already give it a name like the narrative of what happened before the actual narrative. This tells us something about the antagonists and their motivations. Okay, so this is how we would proceed if we are doing this specific version of narrative analysis. Of course, there are many ways to start this and different resolutions as to what to distinguish and in how much detail to distinguish things. Okay, so this has been a first look at how to code qualitative texts using OpenQDA. The wonderful thing is that you can do this together in this framework and develop both the coding and your codebook together. Thank you.